Amiga, the first personal computer that gives you a creative edge.
Amigos, the podcast about everything Amiga. Amigos is a proud member of the Throwback Network, your home for quality retro podcasts. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron Dowdy and John Bodovkar Schaller.
All right, welcome to the Amigos interview series. My name's John, and I'm joined today by Paul Shaw from Melbourne, Australia. Hi, Paul.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's great to be here.
And we're just going to be talking Amiga. Paul, what was your first exposure to the Amiga?
Well, the first time I heard about it, I had a friend called Chris. This was when I was in primary school, and it would have been around 1987 or 1988. And he was talking about this amazing computer that had come out with really good graphics and sound. And I assume he would have, this is probably around the time of the release of the A500 and the A2000. Mm-hmm. So, I heard about all that, but I didn't get into the scene at that point. It wasn't until a couple of years later. And in that 2 years, I was into the PC because my dad had an IBM XT with CGA graphics. So he had like 4-color graphics and no sound at all, just a beeper for sound. And I would look through computer magazines and I'd see all the games, the screenshots of the games, and they had the PC screenshot, which was either CGA or maybe EGA, so pretty awful graphics, not many colors, pretty low resolutions, and then next to it in the same ad they'd have the Amiga version, and the Amiga version was always stunning to look at. There was just a world of difference between the two in these computer game ads, and I thought that machine is just amazing. And then eventually I decided I was going to buy one, but I was only, I was 13 years old at that point. This was about 1989, 1990, so I started saving up Christmas money, birthday money, and then I eventually bought an Amiga.
Now, set the scene for us. Where did you purchase it? Where was it, in a department store, in a computer store?
I bought it. It was an Amiga 500, and I bought it from a place called Maxwell Computers in Collingwood in Melbourne, and they were a specialist computer store, but they did a lot of Amiga stuff. So, from what I recall, then Amigas were in some of the bigger stores, and they were also in some of the specialist computer stores as well. And I went to this store because my dad, again, he knew the owner of this store. So I think I got a $50 discount or something like that. And it was also because it was a machine that had been a return. So someone had bought it initially, there was something wrong with it. It was sent back to Commodore, and then they sold it as a machine that had a fault, but it was still new. So I got I think it was $50 discount, and it cost me $750 Australian, which is around $600 US.
Okay.
That kind of price.
Now, did you notice, and I mean this is kind of more than just the Amiga, but for computers at the time, game consoles at the time, did Australia, was it a pretty even conversion for what prices were in the West versus what you were paying for down there?
Well, it's interesting because in those times, pre-internet, there wasn't a lot of focus on the difference in pricing between America and Australia. Now, these days, if there's even a slight difference in price when you convert the money over between America and Australia, there's all sorts of news articles written on it. Like
Sure.
if there's an iPhone and it's $200 more here, they'll write an article about how Australians are paying an Australia tax for being so far away from the rest of the world. Back then, people weren't aware of that, so I didn't know really what they were selling for in America at that point. It wasn't probably till I started buying Amiga magazines, actually.
Right. That was my next question. Was surely when you started getting magazines from either Europe or the United States, you saw the prices that they were selling for there.
Yeah. At that point I did, but I was still only 13, so I don't know if I bothered to do the currency conversions and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And even if you did notice that you were paying more, what could you do about it?
Yeah, that's right. It's completely different to today, where you can, like in Australia, you can get anything from America. You can, even if the company won't sell it to Australia, you just use a re-shipping service. It's easy to get the postage quote. It's really simple now, but back then it would have meant buying through like a mail order house and kind of hoping you don't get ripped off by them and that they're legitimate and everything goes okay. So back then, people just bought from the local computer store, or the local department store. Yeah.
What did the 500 come with?
So what I bought was a starter pack. So it had a box with the actual Amiga in it, and that was like a plain Amiga 500 box. And then then this was sitting in another box, and this other box was like all the starter pack stuff. So it came with one of the RF modulators, the A520 modulator. It had a joystick, which was a terrible quality joystick. It had a few games. I think it was Indiana Jones, and it's FA-18 Interceptor, and a couple of other games. And it had Kind Words, which was a popular word processor back then.
Okay.
So it wasn't a bad pack. It was probably $40 or $50 more than just buying an Amiga with nothing else. And it also, of course, it had Workbench. It had Workbench 1.3.
Mm-hmm. Did you buy the computer with any illusions of doing schoolwork on it or anything like that, or was it going to be strictly a games machine for you?
Yeah, interesting, because the Amiga had a reputation in Australia for being a games machine, but I was planning on doing schoolwork and that kind of thing. So Kind Words I did use, and that was an absolutely atrocious word processor. It would crash probably. If you were using it for a few hours, you'd expect at least one crash in that time. So you're constantly hitting the save button.
Right, I remember those days.
Hoping it doesn't crash. But to buy a good word processor for the Amiga back then was at least a couple of $100 at least. Yeah. They were
what
expensive.
was? I mean, this is something I don't know much about. Do you recall what was kind of the marquee word processor for the Amiga?
There was one. I'm just trying to remember. It was called Word something. I can't remember the exact Wordsworth. I think it was called. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was called Wordsworth, but it was so expensive that it was never even on my radar to buy, because, for example, that was the best one, and it might have been $300 or something like that, and that kind of money then would have bought you a monitor, for example.
Oh, sure.
So and monitors weren't cheap back then.
Yeah, that's.
In fact, what I did initially, I used the RF modulator, and I plugged in it to the TV initially because the monitor, was so expensive, and then saved up for a monitor eventually, And that was like a Philips Amiga monitor. So yeah, the monitor was an interesting story too, because there was two popular monitors back then. There was the 1084S, and there was this Philips. It was called the CM8833, and the story was that Philips made both monitors. They made the Commodore one as well, and apparently what used to happen was Philips would look at all the tubes that they were producing, and the best tubes they'd put in their own monitors, and the other tubes went into the Commodore monitors.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me of, Samsung makes the panels for Apple displays. And I remember when I was working at Apple, you always used to hear about Samsung. They save all their best panels for their own displays, and it's this kind of thing has been going on for a while.
Yeah. And if you look at the Amiga format at the time, the reviews of the monitor, they did used to rate the Philips one as a better monitor in terms of picture quality. They were quite a similar monitor, but it was always regarded as the better one, so that's why I went for the Philips one.
And how much did that set you back?
That was $399. Yeah, and it had the built-in speakers. The good thing about that monitor too was that you could plug in a VCR into them, and you could use them as a TV as well. So it just had a regular, it had the Amiga port at the back, and then it had like one of the yellow video ports as well, and you could just plug a VCR straight into it and use it as a TV.
So you really felt like you were getting, more for your money going that way, because you could set that up in your room or whatever and have your TV and your monitor all in one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I thought it was a pretty good buy. Yeah.
Now, aesthetically, aside from having the built-in speakers, did it look pretty much the same as the 1084?
No, it looked quite different. It was a good color match. Like, they were both very similar colors to match the Amiga. The Philips one had a very rounded front to it. It was a little bit more of a modern design, and the Commodore one was a little bit more square-like. The Commodore one looked more like a regular computer monitor, and the Philips one looked a bit different. So visually, yeah, there was a difference there. There was a fairly big difference visually.
And what was, I apologize if you said before, what was the 1084 selling for at that time?
That was about the same.
About the same.
From what I remember. Yeah, most people did buy the 1084 because that was, the Commodore one. And I think even now, like, a lot of people probably prefer the 1084S because it's the Commodore monitor.
Yeah.
It's the genuine Commodore
set
one.
Of all the branded stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So I think a lot of collectors now probably prefer the Commodore monitor over the Philips one.
Now, do you still have that very Amiga that you bought?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. It's very sentimental because it's the first computer that I ever bought, and I pulled it out about 2 years ago, and I hadn't used it in years. It had been in storage at my parents' place for just thinking for how many years, probably from like 1994 till say 2013.
Wow.
So what's that? That's almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'd sold the monitor actually years ago, so I didn't have the monitor. So I was trying to figure out how I could even get it connected to something, and then I realised I'm going to have to use the A520 modulator. So I plugged in the modulator, and I managed to get it going, but those modulators, they don't plug in very well to the back of the Amiga.
They're notorious for being a bad connection.
Yeah, horrible. Like they don't have screws to screw in or anything like that, and they're a bit wonky. So, the picture was coming on and off as I was wiggling the thing, and eventually the picture just went, and what had actually happened was it had done something to the Amiga. One of the chips had blown from that wiggling.
Yep.
So that A500 is not working at the moment. So there's some problem with the motherboard that I haven't worked it out yet what it actually is. So that's probably going to be a bit of a project to get that going again. I have also thought about getting one of the new motherboards from Gens, the Amiga Reloaded motherboards that are going to be coming out. So I've toyed with the idea of replacing it with one of those.
And those
motherboards.
Are just supposed to be, you literally take the old one out and then you set it in and it fits in perfectly, right?
Yeah, that's right. And then your add-ons are pretty easy to add your flicker fixer and your accelerator, and it brings it up to a more modern specification pretty easily, because an A500 is quite hard to expand as well. An original A500 is fairly tricky to expand compared to the 1200. So maybe I will get one of those and just keep the old motherboard to fix another day.
Yeah, well, I think I'd probably lean that way, just because, especially if you have an eye on expanding it any further in the future.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you mentioned that about the RF modulator, because my co-host Aaron, he had a buddy that the exact same thing happened to his Amiga. He was, fooling around with the RF modulator. It was set up against the back of a wall, and when he pushed the Amiga back, it just hit it the wrong way, and boom, that was the end of the computer.
Yeah, it's funny because back in the day, I remember the connection wasn't that great, but I never had any problems with it. So obviously over time, as things degrade a bit, it's brought that problem on as well. But luckily, I do also own an A1200, so that is the Amiga machine that I'm using.
Now, when did you get the 1200?
That one I bought about 2 years ago, and that machine, I bought it from a guy in the Netherlands. So I bought it from Amiga, and it's quite hard to actually get one in Australia.
Really?
Yeah, there's not that many that come up on. There's some that come up on eBay, but not a lot. And I specifically wanted one in very good condition. I wanted a really white case.
Sure. And
I wanted one that had been ideally recapped and sort of been looked after a bit. So yeah, it was. Eventually, I had to get one from overseas. Otherwise, I was going to be waiting quite a while for a good one to come up on eBay. I also wanted one of the Commodore ones rather than an ESCOM, because I'm sentimental towards Commodore, because when I was into the Amiga, it was the Commodore era of it. I specifically wanted the Commodore badge on it.
Yeah, I think that you are in line with pretty much every other fan of the Amiga. I've never heard of anybody saying, "Boy, I really want that ESCOM one." It's always you want that cool Commodore badge on it. Now, when you first got the 500, did you have a lot of friends that also had machines where you swap in games and things like that?
Yeah, not really. I knew a couple of people with Amigas, but not really a lot. Like in Australia, the Commodore 64 was absolutely massive. Like every second person had a Commodore 64. It was just huge. The Amiga was nowhere near as big, but it still had a degree of popularity. So I only knew a couple of people who had them. Just as an example, if you went into the typical computer store in Australia, say in a shopping centre somewhere, they'd have a wall of Amiga stuff. Like they might be a fifth of the store or a sixth of the store was dedicated to Amiga. So it was quite popular, but it wasn't huge either.
Right. I think that the C64, if it was anything there like it is here, was more of a cultural phenomenon where, and of course the price was the main, one of the main reasons. I mean, it was so inexpensive so early on that everybody just got one, and it was hard to wean people off that. When the Amiga came out, of course it blew everything else out of the way in terms of graphics, but the sheer volume of games that were available on the C64 was a big a big deterrent to anybody wanting to upgrade that didn't immediately have that money.
Yeah. The C64 was like priced so it could be, the Christmas present kind of thing from the parents or whatever. Whereas the Amiga was just a fair way beyond that. It was not something someone would just go out and buy as a present. It was a fair bit more expensive. And then so I had that 500 for a couple of years. Well, I still have it now, obviously, but I used it for a couple of years until about 1992. And, of course, 1992 is when the 1200 originally came out. And, I was reading all the magazines, Amiga Format, Amiga World, and I read about this 1200. And I thought that machine, is the machine to get, because it's got a better processor, it's got a lot more RAM, you can add a hard drive easily. And so I was getting ready and I was going to buy one. And then I thought, I should just do a bit more research on what else I can get for my money, because, PCs were coming down in price by that point, around 1992. And I firstly called up for a price at my local computer store on a 1200 with 2 megs of RAM and a 40 meg hard drive. So the basic 1200 plus a hard drive. And the price quote was something like $1,600, which really blew me away how high the price was.
I mean, that's well above a comparable PC at that time, right?
Yeah, it would have been sort of comparable to a pretty good 386 or a very low spec 486.
Right. So you're talking about, almost top of the line machines.
Yeah, that's right. Something really strange happened in Australia with the pricing of the 1200, because it was way more expensive than America, and I think a fair bit more expensive than the UK as well. Like in America, I think the base price was $400 US for a 1200 when they first came out. That's without the hard drive, and here, like, I think the base price without a hard drive was $1,200. It was like it was double.
Wow.
After currency conversion, it was like double.
It's unbelievable.
Something really strange happened with Commodore Australia and in the way that they priced that machine. So I was just blown away at the price, and I was, instead of spending $1,600, I think I spent about $2,000 on a PC, and you could get like a 486 with twice as much RAM, with an 80 megabyte hard drive, with super VGA graphics,
and then you had the whole world open to you as far as software or whatever you wanted you could get. So.
Yeah. The downside was you didn't get any sound for that. You had to buy a sound card. But back in those days,
there wasn't a whole lot going on in the sound world in the PC anyway, right?
You could get, it was just the dawn of all the Sound Blaster era and CD-ROM. So you could get like a pack with a pretty good Sound Blaster card and a CD-ROM drive for about $400. So lots of people were buying those upgrade kits from Creative. It was called Creative, the company that made it. And you'd also get about 10 CD-ROMs. You'd get like an encyclopedia, and you'd get a few games and a couple of other applications.
And I think they included the joystick port on the sound card too, right?
That's right. Yeah, it had the joystick port as well. Because prior to that, you had to have like a joystick card, from what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And the joysticks were terrible on the PC. Like, they were analog, so you had to adjust the sensitivity so it was just right. And I remember on the early PC that my dad owned, which was an XT, he'd constantly adjusting the X and Y axis to get this joystick working. But the Amiga had just a digital joystick, so you didn't have to adjust anything; it just worked properly.
Yeah.
So there was a big difference with the joysticks. But by the time the 486s started coming out, they'd resolved those kind of issues.
Yeah,
but the funny thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
That's all right. The funny thing is that 1200, I was thinking of buying one, but I never actually saw a 1200 in Australia at all, because I just rung the store, which was a few suburbs away. I never actually went to go and look at them. I just rang up for a price quote. But I never saw a 1200 in any other shop ever in the country.
So maybe because of because of that huge price increase, they were either in and out so fast that you missed it, or possibly never even shipped.
Yeah. From what I've heard, like looking on the internet recently about the 1200 in Australia, it was available at some specialist stores and some department stores, like the ones in the CBD, which is downtown in America. Like, say, the biggest store in Melbourne might have had one, but that was about it. It wasn't very available at all. Whereas the 500 was available in a lot of stores, and the 600 was relatively available as well. The 1200 was just, never saw one.
How odd. Well, Now, did you ever see any of the later models in stores?
I never saw a 3000. The 2000s, which are obviously earlier machines. Mm-hmm. I saw one in some specialist computer stores, and also a friend of mine had a 2000, so I saw some of them. The 4000, I never saw one either.
I don't think a lot of people saw the 4000. that did not get a wide release.
No. The first time I actually saw a 1200 in the flesh was 2 years ago when mine arrived in the mail. That was the first time I'd ever seen one in the flesh.
So was it worth it?
Yeah. It's a great machine because it can be expanded so easily. Mm-hmm. It's easy to add an accelerator card. There's lots of Blizzard cards out there, and there's also new ones being made. The flicker fixes are really easy to add as well. You've got your IndyVision, and obviously the RAM's easy to add because of the accelerator, and it's got AGA as well. So it's sort of got everything you would want, really, except obviously it doesn't have the big case. But apart from that, it's a really good enthusiast machine. It's really stood the test of time, that machine.
Oh, yeah. To me, the 1200 is the ultimate Amiga. I mean, it's got the expandability, but it's also got that classic form factor, the all-in-one form factor. And
yeah.
It's great. Now,
yeah, it's a classic, isn't it? And
it is.
The one I always drooled about was actually the 3000, because when I was big on the Amiga around 1990, that was the machine to have, but the price of that was just, it might have been 5,000 for just the basic box. And
wow.
You still got to buy the monitor, and yeah.
Yeah, that is it's unbelievable that of course, I guess the main market for those were all of the video production houses that use Video Toaster and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And they're still pretty hard to come by these days, Mm-hmm. And so many machines have got battery damage. So many of those big box machines have got battery damage, and yeah, but they still get good prices on eBay and Amibay and that kind of thing.
Now, what are you doing on the Amiga these days?
Well, I mainly use it for games.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've got a CF card with a couple of hundred games on it. So every month or so, I turn it on and play games for half an hour. And there's so many games on it, it's good to try out games you've never actually played before on the Amiga. Maybe the games you always wanted to buy, but you never did.
Right. Is there one that comes to mind, a game you saw in the shops and you said, boy, I'd love to have that, but you never bought it?
No, I used to buy quite a lot of games. So the ones I really wanted, I did end up buying. There wasn't one that I really wanted and I didn't buy. But there was a few that I really used to play a lot. Lotus 2 was probably my favorite game on the Amiga, Lotus Turbo Challenge 2.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really popular game back in the day. Obviously it was a driving simulator, and it had really spot on graphics. The graphics were really good, and the gameplay was just right in it as well.
Now, I believe with Lotus 2, could you actually network two Amigas together and
Yeah.
play?
Yeah, you could. I remember that option on the screen. I never did it though, because I didn't know many people with Amigas, so I never actually did it. But I remember that option always being there. So, it'd be a good thing to do today, actually, to get a couple of Amigas together and try that out. Have the two monitors or two TV
you
screens.
just set them up right next to each other and battle it out. That would be great.
Yeah. There was also, of course, the split screen. So, yeah, you could do the split screen option as well and have your two joysticks going.
Now, do you still, or actually not even do you still, but, you mentioned the word processor, but is there anything else that, non-game applications that you use a lot on the Amiga?
No, that was the main one, because so I never used any paint programs much or anything like that. There was a rendering program that I got free with Amiga format, and you could render landscapes, and that was quite an interesting program to use. The rendering used to take ages. You would set it up and then it would start rendering, and you'd leave it for a couple of hours, and then you'd come back and then it would be finished. So I used to use that quite a lot. I can't remember what it was called though. Yeah, I don't remember the name of that.
So
that
it
software.
would just procedurally generate landscapes? Is that how it worked?
Yeah, you used to plot out things in the landscapes that you wanted, and I think heights of mountains and things like that, and then it would start calculating it all.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that sounds really neat, actually.
Yeah, it was an interesting bit of software, but it was just on the cover disk of Amiga format. Sometimes you'd get full applications on the cover disk, which is actually interesting, because later on I was reading, some people thought that putting full applications on the cover disk is one of the things that contributed to the downfall of the Amiga in terms of software often being free, particularly old versions. Mm-hmm. And that being a problem for, it made the software industry less profitable.
Hold on just a second, Paul. I got to turn off my dehumidifier.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Now, speaking of the downfall of the Amiga, I think that you could write a book about all the factors that contributed to the downfall. But what was, thinking about the seedy underbelly of software piracy in your area? I mean, were you coming across guys that had tons of copied games, and did you copy games, or were you on the straight and narrow?
Yeah. Look, it was very common. Now I hope there's no one from any software houses from back in 1992 listening. But yeah, no, I used to copy games, and copied games, like most games, a lot of games I would buy, particularly the games I really wanted, and the ones you tended to copy would be the kind of extra games that you weren't really sure of, but you'd say, oh yeah, I'd love to have a go at it, and you'd copy it. There was also a mail order house in Australia, in Melbourne, and what they used to do was you would join up with them, and they'd send you out in the mail lists of all these games that they had available, and they were $5 per disc, and every game that came out, they would copy it and they would sell it. So it was really blatant.
Yeah, really overt. How did they evade the authorities? I guess the authorities just didn't care.
Yeah, they just didn't. It just wasn't seen as a big deal back then. You know, like people didn't see it as theft or anything like that back then. In fact, this supplier, they also had a house where they operated from, and you could go directly to them, and they had a whole lot of Amiga set up, and you could buy games. And apparently a lot of police used to go in. There was a police station not far away, and they'd go in and they'd buy games. So
yeah,
totally
it
different.
was just a different world back then. People didn't realize that what they were doing was, it was, I mean, I think maybe in the back of some people's minds, they were thinking, boy, maybe I should be supporting the people that did this stuff. But like you said, there were so many games to try, and since there was no really way to get a demo of a game, that was the way to do it.
Yeah. And it was, interesting too. You could get some demos, on the cover discs sometimes. But it was interesting, this computer store. I remember there was one particular game that was really big. It was Monkey Island 2. And I think it came on, it was either 11 or 12 discs back then. And I remember when they sent their list out for that month, and they said Monkey Island 2, 12 discs. And then it said, you're probably better off just buying the original version, because $5 times 12 is $60, so you might as well just buy it from the shop rather than pay $5 a disc from us. So that was the one game where it made sense just to buy the real version rather than pay your $5 a disc for the copied version.
Now, did the original version come on that many discs too, or was it just because
of the
track? Okay.
Yeah, it had that many discs. I did buy that game, and it was a lot of disc swapping.
That is an insane amount of disc swapping. That is crazy.
Yeah, it is, because you wonder, like, if you're selling software on 12 discs, those floppies weren't all that reliable. So I wonder what percentage of people were returning games to the store if just one disc had an error on it.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine. The returns departments, of course, back then with games were so much different than now. You could even return a game if you didn't like it, and they just return it.
Right. Yeah. That would never work now. Yeah. Once the shrink wrap is broken,
it's yours forever.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, these days, are you still? Is there anything local going on around Melbourne as far as the Amiga scene?
Yeah, there's a few. There's maybe one or two groups that I've heard of, but I've never actually gone along to a meeting. I suspect it's just a small group of guys meeting at someone's house or at the pub, that kind of thing. I haven't heard of anything really professionally arranged or any kind of convention in Melbourne. I think there was something in maybe Adelaide for the 30th anniversary of the Amiga, like there's been in England and America. But apart from that, no, there isn't that much going on. There's a fair few collectors, like when I'm on the forums, I bump into quite a lot of people from Australia, but it's pretty casual, I think, in terms of people getting together.
Right. All right. Well, that is really all the questions that I could think of. Is there anything that you'd like to any special Amiga memory that you haven't shared yet that you'd like to share?
Yeah. I'm just thinking. I remember, yeah, the Amiga 3000T. Do you remember the Amiga 3000T?
I don't think so.
That was an Amiga 3000 in this massive tower case, and it had about 7 drive bays, and it had 6 Zorro slots, and that was the machine, which was absolutely crazy at the time. It was just the hugest Amiga you could imagine. And I remember this one article, I think it was in Amiga World, and they called it the ultimate Amiga. And what they did was they took an Amiga 3000T, and then they added in the best accelerator they could, which would have been a 68040, like 25 megahertz or 33 megahertz or something like that. Flicker fixer, and then they added as much RAM as they could to the accelerator, and then they added more RAM to some of the Zorro slots, and the whole point of it was just for them to add in every possible add-on they could to make it, the most amazing Amiga ever. So I always remember that story and drooling over that particular machine that they had put together. But I think they calculated the total cost of that machine, and it was something like $25,000 US.
So with great speed comes at a price,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. But it was an amazing thing. Yeah.
Now, was the 3000 the 4000 had a big tower too, right?
Yeah. That's very interesting, because there was the 4000 desktop, and then there was the 4000T. The 4000T, though, came out 2 years after the desktop. The desktop was 1992, and the tower was 1994. So as you can imagine, 1994 was a very interesting year for Commodore. Obviously, that was, the end. That was when they declared bankruptcy. Yeah. So this 4000T, apparently they only ever sold about 200 of them, because they came out within a few weeks before Commodore went under. So apparently they sold about 200, and there is almost none of them out there in the marketplace. Obviously, some people have got them, but I've only ever seen one for sale once. So a very rare
of a
machine.
grail for Amiga collectors.
ESCOM released it again, and there's lots of the ESCOM ones, but the Commodore ones you just never see them. So it's interesting, that hardware that you never see, the unicorn of hardware. The other thing that's interesting is there was an accelerator for the Amiga 500, and that had it was the best accelerator ever produced, and it was produced by, I think, Progressive Peripherals, P&PS, they used to call themselves, and it was a 68040. So, an amazing processor in that accelerator, and it fitted internally into the Amiga 500. And this is another one where you just never see one for sale. They barely exist. But apparently with that one, the company who made it, they started producing them, and then they had this huge fire in their warehouse. So in the end, not many of them were made, and they were so expensive that obviously not many people bought them either. They were, I think, about $1,000, particularly to put that in an Amiga 500.
Yeah, a machine that cost less than half of what.
Yeah. You'd wonder who is the target market for $1,000 accelerator in your basic home computer. So
now here's a question for you. In Australia, what was there any kind of hardware or software development being done for the Amiga?
There was a few things, yeah. I remember I think probably the most famous bit of Amiga hardware to come out of Australia was the Phoenix board. And the Phoenix board was a replacement motherboard for the Amiga 1000. And I think it brought it up to more or less Amiga 2000 specs, quite possibly higher. I can't really remember exactly what kind of specifications it brought it up to. But I think it fixed all the kickstart issues in terms of the Amiga 1000 required a disk for kickstart, and it fixed up a whole lot of issues that people might have had with the 1000. And I think that today is a very rare piece of hardware as well, that drop-in board. I think a lot of people, really want that Phoenix board. Mm-hmm. And I think there might even be accelerators made for that board as well. You can plug into it.
Oh wow! So the peripheral had peripherals.
I think so. Yeah. I'm fairly sure of that. Yeah.
Huh.
So that was made in Adelaide, in Australia, from what I recall. Yeah.
Awesome.
The software, I don't remember much. I don't really recall any software that was produced in Australia. Although actually there was one bit of software, and one of the most famous bits of software ever for the Amiga, which was the System Info. So System Info is a piece of software which you run, and it tells you all about the internals of your Amiga. Mm-hmm. And the coolest thing about this software is, particularly for today's Amiga users, it tells you the speed of your Amiga, and it compares it to a whole lot of other machines like the A500, the 3000, 2000, 4000. So if you've got an accelerated Amiga, it compares them all. And then it gives you a comment like, kick ass or phone me now, if it's a fast machine.
Right.
So, and that software, you just see it all over the place. It was written by a guy called Nick Wilson, and he was, I think, in Toowoomba. So yeah, there was some well-known software that came from Australia.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool. That program actually sounds really neat. Because one of the big complaints you hear from Amiga users all the time is that you buy, for example, the 1 meg expansion for the 500, and all the games were supposed to look totally different and awesome, and then a lot of times it would just, the only thing that would be different was you'd see the splash screen that said RAM expansion detected, and then it starts to actually have some positive reinforcement for all this extra money you're blowing on your machine.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. There was some funny things that used to happen there. Like, I know some software that came out which would say, would have a big sticker on it, and it would say AGA. Mm-hmm. So you would think, this has got a whole lot of colours and everything, but it wasn't. It would just run on an ordinary machine.
Brilliant marketing on their part.
Yeah. Some of those games just use the ordinary colours, but they might have needed the 2 meg, but they still just said AGA, because the AGA was the selling point,
Yeah.
Like, you think you're getting amazing graphics when you're buying the game, but maybe you weren't.
All right, well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's great to be here, John. Yeah.
It's been a great. I've loved to hear about the Amiga in the Australia. For all the people that are listening, if you live in another country that is not the United States or Australia, and you'd like to be interviewed, shoot me an email at amigospodcast.com. And for everybody else, thanks for listening. Paul, thank you again.
Thank you, John.
And we'll see you next time. Bye, Paul.
Bye-bye.